And good morning and welcome to OpenLine Online. It's Sunday, August 4th, and I'm hearing myself, but
Echo,
that sounds
echo.
good. That's a nice echo because we're in the valley. We have a very interesting show and a very large panel for you this morning. And let me go around the room. Let me start right next to me. This is Sister Nitha Khan. She will be journalist extraordinaire. Will be joining us in a few minutes. We have one half of the Sports Brothers, Bobby Childs. Good morning, brother.
Good to be here again, everybody.
We have joining us from the first Open Line on Air show, Jennifer Jones Austin. Good morning. We also have joining us community advocate Tony Herbert. Good morning, Tony. We have welcoming back history brother. Brother's been traveling. He's been to the moon and back. Brother Kelly Buchanan. Welcome back, my brother.
Thank
were
you.
missed.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, family.
Good, good, good. Right next to him is Brother Protest. Brother Larry Ham. Good morning, brother.
Good morning. Good morning.
I said that with admiration because that brother is out there. Rain, rain, shine, snow, whatever. You are out there. And rounding it up, my man, Afro Sheen, I call him. Attorney, former judge, Bob Pickett. Good
Yes,
morning,
indeed.
everybody.
Good morning, team, and
Good.
good morning to the crew.
Good
morning.
Good, good. Well, you know, a lot has happened this week, and I might as well just go ahead and jump in. And I'll start off with the first shooting that took place, because there were two shootings that took place yesterday. The first shooting took place where a gunman opened fire in a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, where he killed 20 individuals and wounded 40 others. Then last night, a lot of people went to bed and woke up and thought that when they heard about this shooting, they were talking about El Paso. No, 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 no. There was a shooting in Dayton, Ohio, where at least 9 people were shot and killed, and 16 others were wounded. 24 hours, and we have almost 30 people dead. Bobby Childs just mentioned a statistic to me, and I'm going to pass it over to Bobby and the panel. But Bobby, you just mentioned a statistic to me that is just off the easy.
Well, mass shootings have just been out of control. And actually, I credit the Cisco's, my brother Jamie Harris, who's not here today, as we were texting back and forth. And he pointed out that yesterday's shootings were 250 and 251st shootings, mass shootings of this year alone. And there's only 216 days of the year so far. So we are at an incredible clip where we are having more than one mass shooting a day. One mass shooting a day. And it just causes you to wonder, right? At what point does it change, right? You have to put ideology aside if you really, really value life. And, we've talked about this in the show before. You have politicians who earlier this year fought and changed laws around abortion because they protested and proclaimed that they were all for life. Well, if you're all for life, don't just worry about the ones that are not here yet. Think about the ones that are here.
Right. Now, let me, before we go on more about these shootings, Tony Herbert, update us. We had a shooting in Brooklyn.
Yeah, we had 2 shootings last night, but before we do that, because I failed to do it on the first show.
Yes.
Also, there were 2 mothers in Chicago.
Yes.
That was shot and killed, Chantel Grant and Andrea Stoudemire, who are actually on site, on location, doing, an anti-violence protest against the violence, and wind up being shot and killed and what have you doing that. We don't know if it was, if they were the intended or if they were shooting at somebody that was around
Someone
them.
said that they were
shooting at them because they're making a lot of noise.
Wow.
So what the problem is overall is not only that they were shot and killed, but we had some young ladies that were actually not killed but shot in East New York, Brooklyn last night. One young lady shot, and then actually around 6 o'clock this morning over by Marcus Garvey houses in Brownsville, another young lady was shot in the thigh.
Wow, Marcus Garvey houses is over there off of East New York Avenue,
Yeah.
right around the corner from Pickett Avenue.
Yes.
Tony probably look at me and say, "15, I used to hang over there. Used to play spades down
I
there
don't
in the
hang over
Tenant
there,
Patrol."
bro.
You know, right there in 1400. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, it's a lot of gang activity over there. And they believe that's what it's related to.
it's terrible. Sister Jennifer, one of the things that we talked about this morning is the mental aspect. In the El Paso shooting, the suspect, Patrick Cruces, I believe, 21 years old. He was not killed. He was taken into custody, and he presented a manifesto. Talk a little bit about that.
He wrote a 4-page manifesto that, I don't know if it is appropriate, if it is correct, if it is good to advertise that he wrote this manifesto and have other people read it, or if it's something that should, that the police should have and we should lock it down, because in it, he just goes to town and he lets you know what he's thinking and what a lot of people in America are thinking right now. He talks in his manifesto, he writes about the Native Americans in this land not doing what they should have done. Like he says, people want to say that white people came in here and, took over and essentially decimated the Native American, community and civilization. And he says, well, the reason we got to get out here and do this is because they didn't do enough. They didn't fight back enough. So white America needs to fight back, because Native Americans taught us that if you don't fight back, then your land will no longer be your land. He goes on to talk about how we will become increasingly a Democrat, one party state, because Democrats are all about pro-immigration and Republicans are anti-immigration. The reason he's down there in Texas doing what he's doing is because too many Hispanics are coming through the borders in Texas, and once they come in, and if Democrats get their way, then they'll start voting. They'll get the right to vote. He even talks about get the right to vote as undocumented people, and and then they'll be able to put numbers up and take over this country. He talks about how America is too pro-corporations, and how that has hurt us. He talks about how his opportunity to live the American dream has been compromised. He just goes in on economic issues. He goes in on race. He goes in on the fact that he believes that he's against racial mixing. My point is that it's out there, and if you read it, what you appreciate is that his mental state is white supremacist, right? It's white nationalist, and that when he writes, it's not just something that's in his head. He's being fed by other people, right? He's being fed by the rhetoric of this president and others, the white nationalists who've already been in place, and the supremacists. But they're more and more like him. And as someone said earlier today, when Dylan Roof, when he took down people in North Carolina, in Charleston, he talked about how they were going to be more like him. Well, this manifesto that this young man put out, when people will read it, they're going to be inspired by it. Others of us have to look at this and figure out, how do we pick this apart and what do we do with it?
Mm-hmm. Brother Achille, again, welcome back. Let me just update. In the Dayton, Ohio shooting, I said that there was 9 killed and 16 were wounded. That number has increased. 26 were injured in the shooting in Dayton, Ohio. The suspect wore body armor, and he was killed. I don't have too much more on the suspect right now, but I do know that he wore body armor. He had a high-capacity gun, AR-15, assault rifle that was used in these mass shootings. And I know, and this is not getting on you because I'm right with you.
No, I knew it was coming. So bring it
Yeah,
up.
so because, for me, I believe that, folks have the right to bear arms, but these high-capacity weapons, what is your thoughts?
Well, let me say, I was listening to the show earlier this morning, and the incidents that occurred over the past 24 hours, one is clearly an act of domestic white supremacist terrorism. The second, we're not really sure what the source or the cause is. We're not sure. You mentioned violence occurring in the African American community that has nothing to do with terrorism, has to do with violence among ourselves, drugs, and other antagonisms that have nothing to do with societal political issues. What is the link with all of them? I think America is at war with itself. America is a very pained and sick society. Violence is the first thing most of us seem to gravitate toward, rather than discourse and discussion and listening. And a lot of these issues, I think the intersectionality, a term that Sister Jennifer used earlier today, I think the intersectionality of all of these is that we are a very sick society and that we are at war with ourselves. And that sickness is being perpetuated and instigated by political opportunists and people who have clear political, ideological agendas. I don't have answers. Let me say, I don't have answers. I have more questions. Sister Jennifer said before, just earlier, she questioned whether that sick man's manifesto should or should not be. I mean, she was raising a question. You weren't saying it should not be read. I think we need to understand what the hell is going on, because that's exactly where we are. We are in hell with ourselves. And, you know, from the hip comments, let's get rid of this, let's do this. First of all, I just want to extend my condolences to everyone who was affected in El Paso and in Dayton, Ohio.
There's no words.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There really aren't.
And I am too humble at this point to just spout off answers, because I don't have any.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Nev.
Larry raised his hand though. Are you sure you don't want to speak?
Go ahead.
It's okay. Good morning. Sorry, I was late. Actually,
Again.
guys. Whatever, Bobby. Actually, I was on hold to possibly go somewhere, but anyway, I'm here. So I just want to echo first what you said, Achille, in terms of condolences to the families. And also, after the 2016 election, there were many people who said that there were so many communities that were living in actual fear, and they were scared. And there were many folks on the right who made fun of them and said, oh, you're just exaggerating. What do you have to be scared about? And this is what we on this show and in many places have been talking about for years now, that there are people that are literally walking around scared for their lives. This is not just rhetoric. This is not just politics. This is about actual life and death. And the fact that somebody was motivated by all of this stuff out here, and it's not only, obviously, it's the President of the United States, it's coming from the highest office in the land, but there are many other people around him. There are many entities, entire machines, people who are being silent for him or complicit. You have things like Fox News and the whole right-wing echo chamber that are spouting this stuff day in and day out. And it was inevitable that somebody was going to act on this sooner or later. So we're not surprised, but we are also very angry and saddened by this today. Like, I know I am, because I hear about this all the time from people who are scared to even just walk around. So it's small things from like microaggressions to other things like kids being bullied in school, to things that happen in the workplace, and then to actual, attacks against people, to things like arson against mosques around the country, stuff spray painted outside synagogues, things going on all the time, all across the country that don't make the headlines, and then all the way up to horrific horrific domestic terrorism acts like this one. So I am really, really pissed off this morning, and I was yesterday and saddened at the same time. And it's like, I'm at a loss for words, but then I have a lot of words also going on too.
Yes, Brother Larry.
Yes, I want to join with Brother Killian and everybody here. I'm sure we all share the sentiment that we express our condolences to the victims, not just of these latest two, but of the whole 251 mass shootings that we have had just in the 7 months of 2019. But I want to say, once again, that we must ban assault rifles in the United States. I think it's eminently clear that the overwhelming majority of these mass shootings were carried out by people carrying either automatic rifles or automatic style rifles. In El Paso, this racist had an AK-47. And according to New York Magazine, in Dayton, he had an AR-15. And these weapons were legally purchased. These were not bought on the black market. So we have two trains running here. How to deal with the problem of weapons in our community, most of whom are probably not legally purchased, but then on the other side, how do we deal with these assault rifles that are in fact legally purchased? So we must return to the law that we had in this country, because there was a ban on assault weapons. And when the Republicans came to power, they let the law sunset, which in essence lifted the ban. Secondly, we have to call this what it is. I heard the police in El Paso talk about homicide. This was, first of all, a hate crime, and secondly, it's domestic terrorism. We need a domestic terrorism law in this country. We don't have it. We have hate crime laws, but we don't recognize crimes of a certain degree and a certain character as domestic terror. And so we need to ban assault weapons, and we need a domestic terrorism law. And we won't get this, and I heard one of the callers on the radio show talk about voting. I agree with her. We won't get this until we take out Trump and take out the Republican majority in the Senate, because they will block it.
And to that point, Larry, so Director Wray said that the FBI made 100 domestic terrorism arrests this year, and a majority of those domestic terrorism cases were motivated by some version of what you might call white supremacist violence. Right. And that's something that we need to also call out and talk about, because it's not only here, it is global. It's happening all across Europe. You're seeing a rise in all of these hate groups, anti-immigrant groups, and they're gaining power, actual seats of government in so many countries all across Europe. And this is why you had people like Steve Bannon going over to Italy to rile up folks over there. So it's interconnected, and that's what we really need to start focusing on.
Exactly. Sean King just tweeted out a picture, and I appreciate our engineer Tazo getting this to me. Sean King tweeted out a picture of Eric Gardner being choked and killed. And then he shows the gentleman, that's how they treated him yesterday, killed 20 people, arrested.
Yeah.
Arrested. And Sean King states, one man was falsely accused of selling cigarettes. He was killed. The other man just murdered 20 people with an AK-47 assault rifle. This is America. You look at the picture.
One of our viewers, Edward Latson, he had sent a message out while we were talking around how the suspect was apprehended in El Paso, but yet John Crawford in Illinois got shot in Walmart because he had a pellet gun, and the police thought he was going to shoot up the place, where in Walmart they actually sell these weapons.
Correct.
And so his life was taken, not a mass shooting, and the cops got off on that one, by the way. And this guy gets apprehended. The same thing we said with the shooting in Parkland down in Florida. How that shooter got apprehended after shooting up so many kids with so much firearms out there. It just boggles your mind how inconsistent these things are. And I know on the radio side we were talking about New York State gun laws, right? Which has, from a legal standpoint, has one of the strictest in the land. But it's actually under assault by the NRA and others, and actually the police to some degree. So they, the New York State Rifle Association has a case that is now going to be heard by the Supreme Court this fall. And basically, one of the carries you can have is a premise carry, which means if you get licensed and you fill out all the paperwork and pay all the fees and go through the background check, you're legally able to have an on-premise firearm. You have to register that with the police. And you also have to go back to the police when you want to move it from one premise to another premise, as well as taking it outside the state to go to a private shooting range. Right now, you can shoot at a police range, but if you want to go outside of that, you need police permission. And the police said that, well, we think that's a bit too much. The police. And so the Rifle Association now has jumped on that. And now they have the case in front of the Supreme Court to listen to. New York is trying to ease it a little bit. But again, what's wrong with having to check in to say, here's where my firearm is going to be? When it is illegal, New York State back in 2013 changed the laws to say it can be a felony. So if it's a first time offense with an unlicensed weapon, you can get hit with a misdemeanor, which is $1,000 and a year in jail. But if it's a second offense, it's a felony up to 4 years
May I
in prison.
respond?
Sure.
We can over-legislate our lives in the hopes that we will remain safe. But at the moment we do that, and I think we're at that point where we're doing that and we're allowing it to happen, none of us want to live in that kind of world. And I don't want to live in that kind of world. If I can finish. I own firearms. It took me 6 months every time I wanted to purchase a handgun. 6 months. I had to go through mental processes. I had to have people verify my sanity. I had to have people from my employment verify. An arduous 6-month process. And a police officer, if he or she chooses for whatever reason to suspect that you might on the spot do something for whatever reason, they have the right to just take your firearm. There are so many laws on the books right now, and what is happening continues to happen on the question of violence. AR-15s, AK-47s, yes, they're high-velocity firearms. They are weapons of war. Let's admit it. They are weapons of war. But a handgun, a .45, is a standard issue for any soldier. 9mm are used by police officers in their everyday duties. All of them are considered weapons of war. It's beyond the ownership of weapons that the Second Amendment gives you a right to own because the higher value is you have a right to defend yourself. We can get
I'm gonna
into.
ask a question, too.
Just so you know, just the Second Amendment. No, I'll let you continue. The Second Amendment. That's not an amendment. The Second Amendment says when there's no militia around.
Okay, that issue too has been argued by constitutional scholars. So that too is a controversy.
Let me just
Let me-
also
may-
wait. Let me
I
just
haven't
also
fin-
interject
I
on the
haven't fin-
Constitution.
Jennifer, I
Let me
haven't
just
finished.
on the Constitution.
Jennifer, I haven't finished. Please.
I don't
It is,
mind.
and then everyone now is asking me to
Let's
wind
just
up
go.
when people, but it is beyond the question of arms. The person in Charlottesville who killed protesters against the neo-Nazis and fascists used an automobile. Yes, it's an absurd statement to say, let's get rid of everybody's cars because it too can be used as a weapon of death. It is beyond the question of weapons. It is we are at war psychically and spiritually with ourselves and with each other in this nation. And I think very pat answers to what needs to be done. If we knew what was to be done, it would have been done already.
So I appreciate the points that you're making. Just 2 points I want to add to this conversation. The first is that what I find interesting whenever we talk about laws in this nation and we talk about the Constitution, we are quick to invoke the Constitution when it serves our purposes, right? But we also are very quick to say, oh, this Constitution needs to be upended, right? Or we need to change things. We can change the laws. Why do we have to be beholden to what founding fathers did better than 200 years ago? It's just an interesting point of fact, and I'm not taking you, calling you out alone. It's just across the board. When it works for us, the Constitution's a really good thing. When it doesn't work for us, we need to upend it and do something differently. Right. The second point I want to make is, and I don't own a gun. I didn't grow up in a household where we own guns. My family does not own guns. And so whenever I come into these conversations, whenever these things happen, I'm often reminded of James Baldwin's words concerning the Negro in America and slavery. And when he, and I may not be quoting it directly, but he said something along the lines of America cannot resolve the question of race in America until it begins to first address the fundamental question: why did you need a Negro? Why did you need a nigger in the first place? And so when we get into these conversations about guns and gun violence, I have to ask myself, why do we think that we need guns in the first place in our homes as we walk the streets? And maybe, you call me naive. Maybe it's very basic, maybe it's very fundamental, rudimentary. But why do we even need these in the first place? And it's one of those things, if you have access, then you're more likely, you're more prone. So maybe we need to be stepping back and asking that to begin with.
I think,
Well,
Jennifer, I think in a society that is violent as America is, folks look at the perspective that I have a right to protect myself, and if the criminals are going to utilize those type of weapons against me, a law-abiding citizen, then I should have the right to have a weapon to protect myself. So you look at the.
I just want
a vicious cycle
point of
going
information.
back and forth. But that's
Point of information before we get lost in the morass here. I did not advocate the banning of guns. I said we should ban assault rifles. Because as our discussion evolves, it tends toward, it sounds like we're talking about banning all guns, and then everybody piles on and says, I have a right to own a gun.
Right.
No one is saying that we should ban people's right to own a firearm.
Jennifer is suggesting it.
I know, I did not
she didn't.
suggest it.
Wait. Don't take me off track here. I did not say ban firearms, we have to take action. We can no longer sit idly by while people are being killed in mass.
Correct.
How do you kill in mass? You must have a weapon that
Exactly.
can fire in mass.
Yep.
correct.
You know, the one that went into the synagogue in Pittsburgh had a automatic rifle. The one that went into Christ Church had an automatic rifle. The one that was in Gilchrist, California, had an automatic rifle.
Exactly.
The one in El Paso had an automatic rifle, and the one in Dayton had an automatic rifle. And in 95% of these mass shootings, they have an automatic rifle.
Exactly.
We had a law to ban these things.
Correct.
Yep.
Republicans came to power. They allowed the law to sunset, and the purchase of these arms skyrocketed. The problem can be impacted. In Australia, they banned these
right.
weapons, and the numbers of mass shootings plummeted.
Exactly.
In New Zealand, they banned these weapons, and the numbers of incidents are almost non-existent.
Yep.
We can do it here.
That's correct.
We can do it in the
You're
United
absolutely
States.
right, Larry. So just on that point,
Excellent
in this horrific shooting in El Paso, police arrived in 1 minute, or it was less than a minute. So that means in that amount of time, in 1 minute, think about that, or less than 1 minute, he killed 20 people and injured and wounded dozens of others. So that goes directly to your point about these assault rifles and how we need to implement those bans again. Absolutely.
I wanna bring-
Lorenzo Smallwood actually pointed that out, that a car can't kill 20 people in 2 minutes if you run through it. So just to clarify, right, the reason I brought
Sure
up
it could. And he doesn't know that it cannot. depending upon who
the reason I
driver
brought
is.
up the New York State situation is because New York has the most onerous gun, and you've verified it in terms of how long it took you. My point dovetails what Larry was talking about, right, which is when you allow each state to have different levels where someone can get a gun in one state and be licensed and bring it into another state, that to me is a problem. One of our viewers says that in Texas, what you described, he said, I don't have that waiting period. I didn't have to fill out all that paperwork out there. And so when you look at the shooting in El Paso while it was still in the state, he drove over 100 miles from outside of Dallas to El Paso with an assault rifle. So the transporting of arms, whether it's a handgun or assault rifle, to me, this is one, back to your point, Larry, at a federal level, a lot more can be done and should be done. And then the last point, you talked about handguns. So when the Glock came out, and actually the improved Glock, where the trigger was much more sensitive, the guidelines was police officers needed 80 hours before they can get certified with it. They fought to say, no, we know how to fire firearms, let's do 40. But they ended up getting self-inflicted wounds because as soon as they put their hand on the holster, they went straight into the trigger and shot themselves in the leg. And so they had to go back and change. It says now it's mandatory 80 hours again out there, right? So again, I get even trained professionals have a problem with these high-end, whether it's a handgun or assault rifle.
I just want to say something, and we're going to have to move on. Something that Achilles said, and I believe in a sense of the background check, and I believe in the mental check, and not only in the beginning, but duration. Same thing with the police department, and I'm coming to you, Tony, on this one, because I think what got lost with this whole thing in New York City, where the water being thrown on the police officers, right before that, we seen a trend of NYPD police officers taking their lives, and there's a problem. And now when they have to take the psychological tests at the beginning of the whole process of
Yeah, it's right
coming
after-
into the
it's right after
department.
the-
Once
right
you
after
get
the
into the
physical,
department,
yeah.
that doesn't really take place anymore.
No.
So my question is, you have people who work with firearms, and there's something wrong. Even though this is a small percentage, there's a small percentage of those in this large police department here that are taking their lives. Something is wrong, and I don't. Is it being swept under the rug? I believe so, because they're not getting
Nobody's
this
talking about it.
information. What do you know more about? Do you know more about what's happening and what they are saying about what's happening with this?
Just for some background, I actually took the police test in 1987, passed it, went and did the physical, but some tornado happened in Brooklyn, so I couldn't go do the psych and what have you. And that was when I decided I was just going to go out of town for a little while. I wound up staying in Williamsburg, Virginia for 6 months and missed my list number, which was okay because I don't want to get shot at for $23,000 a year anyway. But the psychological aspect of it, truth be told, is that, and I've always been a proponent, that we should have our officers checked or revisited with regards to a psych exam every 2 years and what have you, because the stuff that they see, the stuff that they witness, and and I actually know one of my Masonic brothers and what have you is a lieutenant on the crime scene, just retired. But the fact of the matter, he would have these pictures in his phone of the crime scene. So if they're exposed to this, what does that give you as a psyche? And as one who's in the community and having had dealt with the number of people who have been killed and having gone to the morgue with the families or whatever the case may be, that's a lot. That's a lot that comes on you. So the question of the matter is, how are they able to release that? So again, I do believe that as a proponent that they should be revisited every 2 years with regards to a psych exam. The lives being taken, I mean, there's a myriad of things that people are suggesting. I don't know, can't confirm it. But at the end of the day and what have you, the thought process of losing your pension or whatever might have come out of the circumstances for them to take their lives, it has to be something really serious because these individuals still have guns in their control, in their possession. So the question of that is, would they take somebody's life or was it better for them to take theirs?
May I? And then, if you want to move on, we may. You spoke about the trauma being experienced by police officers who work every day with guns. We also know that there's a major, major mental health issue with soldiers who come back from our constant war culture in this country. And they are committing suicide as well because of the culture of violence they experience every day. I would suggest also that there is mental health issues in African American communities and communities where violence is an issue. And let's suggest that we get rid of assault weapons. Let's suggest that, which, by the way, are semi-automatic and not automatic, but that's just an aside. But let's say we get rid of all of the assault weapons. We will still have a major issue of violence in African American communities where assault weapons are not the weapon of choice among the murders and killings of people of color among ourselves. And so I suggest that, again, as I said before, and I stand by it, we are at war with ourselves. We have a moral and spiritual crisis being exploited by political opportunists, racists, white supremacists, and other ists.
Right.
I don't want to
But
lose
then-
track. I just don't want to lose track. I just want to say one thing he said about assault weapons. And I mean, I know that the criminals, I remember when the New York Police Department were carrying the revolver. And I know that the criminals were starting to use Uzis. And I started to see people in our community use Uzis.
Well, that
I
was
didn't know about
perpetuated
automatic
by
weapons at that time.
That
but-
was perpetuated by a hip hop culture that glorified Uzis and AK. I'll get my AK, and you know that not. So again, it just didn't happen out of the air. There are material bases for why certain things happen. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, but the answer to all of this is not to arm yourselves more. So when you talk about suicide, right?
We respectfully
when
disagree.
When you
disagree with that,
we can can respectfully disagree. When we talk about suicides, the number, well, a really high percentage of people who commit suicides do it by shooting themselves or killing themselves. And if you look at people who own guns, you're more likely to be killed by a gun or wounded when you own one. So this is not the answer to resolve this problem, is to, start, everybody start grabbing a gun, and the whole notion, what the NRA says, that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. We all know that's nonsense and BS. There was a guy who even, I think it was in El Paso, and he had a gun on him. He didn't fire it. Instead, he picked up kids who were running around alone, scared, screaming. Ex-military, picked them up and ran out with them. He didn't start shooting. He saved lives by doing that. And actually, I feel so bad for him, because I think he tweeted saying, I could have done more, I could have saved more kids, and he already had guilt from that.
But he was also stopped because they thought he might have been the
Exactly.
shooter.
They thought he might have been the shooter because he had a gun,
he was
and
black.
because he was black.
Glad it was
and all
black.
that.
I appreciate you raising the point about the access, right? And that it's not just people who are popping off, in the middle of like a party, or rolling up on a pub, as this guy did in Dayton, Ohio, or walking into Walmart. It's not just people who are, living in post-traumatic stress from war, whatever. I actually have a family member who, had access to a gun and got into a fight with his wife and killed her. Right? It's not just, we have to look at this. It's more than post-traumatic stress. It's more than me just defending myself in the moment.
Oh, I agree.
We have to study this and not just put it all in one box. And that's why I raised the question, not because I'm saying all guns should be banned, but whenever you have issues of this magnitude, you have to go back to the fundamental question, the core, to figure out how you unpack it, how you peel back the layers of the onion to figure out what is the nexus, I should say, what is the core of
We
the
are
problem,
in agreement
and
about
what do you
that.
do with it?
And let me even go further, Nitha, because I would agree with you. Let's get rid of every gun in America, starting with every white male who's disaffected, every police officer who's killed a black boy or black woman or brown or brown person in the streets. Let's start with them first. Let's start with white men in America and police officers. And then let's cascade down the rest of the American population. Let's start with them first, and let's see what happens.
All right. Well, we're going to move on. This is something, again, we didn't, you never plan to hear these things, but they continue to happen. And, Bob, you mentioned earlier, Bob Pickett, you mentioned about the climate, the culture, especially coming out of the White House. We can talk further about that another time.
I just want to say this. We can't.
The current White House, and Donald Trump, I think, is a big problem.
Yeah, it is a big problem, but this has been happening, like we said
It's
before.
it's
happened
beyond.
before
It's
Donald
bigger
Trump,
than him.
before.
Yeah,
But we
It's
gotta
bigger
move
than
on.
We can't surrender to hopelessness.
No one's
What do you
being
mean? Wait.
hopeless. No
What do you mean hopeless?
No one's
can't
being
be-
hopeless.
I mean what I'm saying.
What do you?
People look at this problem, and it's so big that they say we can't do anything about
Oh,
it.
that, yeah.
They say that in our community
but we can.
every
We
day.
We can do something about
definitely.
this. It's not hopeless.
Right.
It's not impossible. We can do something. And the first thing is to ban these assault weapons and to demand, to call your congresspeople, demand that they not collapse before the God of the NRA, before their money, and they vote against them and vote for banning these assault weapons. But I also want to say that I am in agreement with Nitha and Jennifer. From a legal and political perspective, we have to take action, and you have to start somewhere. So we start with assault weapons. But at the same time, I understand their moral and ethical position. 40,000 people a year are killed in this country from guns. 40,000. Half a suicide and half a homicide, basically. It's crazy. No other country on the face of the earth has as many people killing itself as the United States. And it has a lot to do with the way the country was founded. It was founded on murder and genocide and violence. And it's in the very social fabric. And it has rolled its way down through the generations. But at the same time, we have to struggle against this propensity to kill and to want to kill. And I understand, people say, as soon as I say ban assault weapons, people start talking about Malcolm X and we have a right to defend ourselves. Of course you have a right to defend yourself. Don't be silly. It goes without saying that if somebody comes in your house, you have a right to defend you, your family, and your people against it. That's not what we're talking about.
Exactly.
What we're talking about is going to a club, and because you can't get in, you go home, put on some body armor, get a long gun, and come back and shoot up a whole lot of people.
Give you
That's
the bell
what we're
on that
talking
one.
about.
I give you that. I give you.
I have a 21-year-old daughter.
Mike.
I have a 21-year-old daughter. I have a 17-year-old son. And I'm appreciating that I now have to add to the repertoire of questioning, when they are dating. What is this person's position on guns?
Wow.
Does this person own a gun? I mean, I'm being serious. I have to ask, like
Scary.
no, you have to.
And you know why?
Because if he has a gun,
gets stopped and he isn't licensed, they both go into
I
jail.
have to ask these questions.
But when I was in South Carolina past week, I had to mediate between my nephew and my father-in-law because the culture is that they have access to guns. So my nephew was like, well, my grandfather's not going to take me to the range, but he has to take you to the range. If you're old enough to go out there and buy a gun, then you need to know how to operate. My father-in-law is licensed to carry a concealed weapon. And if he has weapons in the house, he has a responsibility to himself and to his family. And if he feels his grandson is ready, then you do it in a proper manner. But there has to be a conversation if that is going to take place.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, then what happens when that grandson, right, who, let's just say he's 21, 22, and research increasingly shows that impulse control is not fully formed in the brain until the late 20s, right? So now he's angry because his girlfriend, he thinks she's talking to somebody else and he can't control his impulse, so he goes off and he pops,
Jennifer, let me.
I'm just, rather than arguing with her, now he takes a gun and he shoots her brains
let's
out.
rewind this back. The question. That's why I said, if he can go in the store and buy it without the responsibility and the conversation and properly trained to deal with this, he still can go get the gun.
Right.
So if his grandfather can have a conversation and they can deal with this in a responsible way, then you have to deal with it responsibly. That's all I'm saying.
Right, and I'm talking about just the fundamental access. Right?
Well,
And
I
especially
just don't
for-
think that this country. Well, again, like you said, it's the hopelessness. But anyway,
No,
we
and-
can continue.
and-
We can continue
wait,
on. But
and-
I
wait.
gotta move on. I
I
gotta
just
move
want-
on. I gotta move
Wait,
on.
just one thing.
Wait, we keep saying one thing. No. 5 years after Eric Gardner's death, we gotta move on. 5 years after Eric Gardner's death, a police administrative judge recommended on Friday, I apologize, but we got to move on. Our time is running short. On Friday, that NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo, who placed Eric Gardner in a chokehold during a botch arrest, should be fired. Now the Civilian Complaint Review Board and Pantaleo's attorney will now have 2 weeks to draft their response once the judge's recommendation is passed on to the police commissioner. Of course, we know that the final decision on whether or not Officer Pantaleo is fired will now fall on the police commissioner. Do the Eric Gardner's family finally get justice? Will the police commissioner fire him, or will he bend to the PBA.
I don't think they're getting any justice whatsoever. Firing this guy is kind of like just a slap on the wrist. Truth be told, he should have gone to jail. The problem I had with him overall, even not only of the fact of the matter that Eric was saying to him, "I can't breathe." The problem I have is after he took Eric down, he had a celebratory kind of like fist, bump action going on, and that pissed me off. And that, in its sense, was why I felt that he should have actually been put in jail.
So, and by the way, Pantaleo in all this time has not only stayed on the job, he's gotten a raise. He's been able to collect his pension. So the fact that this has happened for, 5 years now?
5 years.
And this family, the Garner family, has been suffering without any semblance of justice is just atrocious.
By the way, there were other police officers aiding and abetting Pantaleo in the murder of this black man.
With the exception of one black sergeant. She
he-
wasn't even there.
Oh, she wasn't there. She wasn't there.
No, she was called. She went to the scene after everything had already laid itself out, and she's now on trial.
Okay. All right. 5. How many white men were there?
That I didn't count.
There were 5 or 6 white police officers licensed to own a firearm, licensed to kill. Not a single shot was fired, and a black man is dead. I rest my case.
Yeah, let's just appreciate that, there's the legal term of justice, but truthfully, even if action had been taken against Pantaleo as it should have been taken, the family never would really realize true justice, right?
Right.
This is like justice looking at it from going beyond the Garner family. This is all about accountability for police misconduct and wrongful police activity in this nation. And the issue that we're grappling with right now, as it concerns this case as it plays out, is when James O'Neill, Commissioner O'Neill, makes the decision, he's going to be making a decision one way or the other, setting a standard about police misconduct and accountability in New York City. And then that's going to reverberate across the nation, which is why it's taking us so long to get here. This is not just simply about Garner. It's whether or not, this city and in turn this nation is going to take action when we see, the cameras told us all. The NYPD manual told us this was illegal activity. Are we going to hold an officer accountable for illegal activity, or are we going to placate to all of the people who say, but they're out there working every day to save our lives, and why can't you make one mistake on the job? Right? I'm just saying, it's a bigger issue.
It's much bigger. But either way it goes, nobody's going to be happy with the answer.
No.
And there's going to be some backlash.
Right. And you talk about this culture. How many black men and women have been killed by the police unjustly since Eric Garner has died? And
Let me help you.
Yes.
Garner. Eric Garner.
Garner.
Okay.
Got it.
And it's not only who's killed. We always talk about this. It's who's stopped, who's profiled, who's arrested, who gets thrown in jail, who gets the harsh sentences, who doesn't. It's the entire system. It's a systemic problem, and this is why we need criminal justice
But
reform.
nobody's keeping tabs. Nobody's following the stats. We need to have our own group go in and do an audit of the police department if we can.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
one of the things we need is a law passed that mandates that the police must submit data every year on their shootings and their
For an audit.
homicide. Not just an audit. Right now,
There's no national.
there's no national system to collect the data that requires. Now, they do ask for it, but a municipality is not required
Yep.
to give the data.
Yep.
We should have a law that says if you do not give the data, you will not receive your federal funding that you need
Hear,
to
hear.
run your police force.
Hear, hear.
Exactly.
And it-
How can we deal with the problem if we don't even know the dimensions of the problem? I mean, it's absurd to think.
Yep.
Now think about this. It's absurd to think that it is against the law or that the law does not require police departments to submit this data. You know what else is against the law? It is against the law to do research on handgun shootings in the United States. Congress does not allow federal funds to be used to do research into this problem. What we're dealing with is a legal and political infrastructure that prevents us from actually engaging the problem in a meaningful way. I say this, on Pantaleo, if they don't fire Pantaleo, the masses of people should shut this city down.
Yep.
It should reverberate across the nation. Right. You asked the question, how many people have been killed? The police in the United States kill on average 1,000 people every year. In 1 year, the United States police kill more people than Great Britain killed in the entire 20th century. In the 5 years since Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, 5,000 people have been killed by the police. Every 28 hours, a black person is killed by the police in the United States. That's just the tip of the
So
iceberg.
Larry, just to say this, the Washington Post did a big, not only article, but expose on this problem in the sense of what you just said about the police, how many people they kill, how many people of color. They were talking about black men and black women that were killed, questionable, by the police.
So let me just say this. I completely agree with you. Everything you said,
Yes,
I agree
Larry,
with you
you're
on,
right
Larry.
Point, baby. You're right on point.
And
That don't mean shut up.
No, you're right on point.
Different meetings.
For me, it means shut up. For you.
so what I'm sitting with right now, and this is maybe in part because I have worked in government, I've worked outside of government, I've worked on civil rights issues, and right now I'm thinking about summer. I can't help but go back to 1991 to what happened in Crown Heights. Remember back in 1991, right?
I was there.
I keep thinking about the Rodney King verdict. What was that, 1991, 92? And I'm trying to figure out, what is this city, what is it going to look like come 2-3 weeks out when this decision comes down
And
from the commissioner, right? So, what's it going to look like if in my opinion, I believe our collective opinion, he comes down on the wrong side? What's going to happen here? And in turn, if he comes down on what we would believe is the right side, what's going to happen? And I just keep on thinking, what is our respective responsibility or reaction to this? Because it could be explosive.
I think what has to take place, quite frankly, in anticipation of whatever might be the negative, that the elected officials should start having the conversations in our communities with folks about what we should be doing proactively and not destroying that which we have already built. Because there's going to be a lot of pissed off young men and women. And these young people, quite frankly, quite to the contrary, do have their weapons. And it's going around. I don't know if you guys saw it online. There's a shirt saying, don't let your president get your ass whooped because we're not our ancestors.
That's correct.
And these young people are better organized than our ancestors would ever be when it comes down to being able to have access to these firearms.
Let me just say this, though. The Day of Outrage, I believe it was 1988 when we did the Day of Outrage.
And it shut the city down.
We shut New York City down. And it was interesting, and I say this to you, Larry, an appreciation of leading an organization. I don't even believe that December 12th at that particular time. And we came together, and I'm talking about from Erica Ford to Reverend Sharpton to all of these folks, and we had a plan in place. What to do, how to go about it, who was going to get arrested. So my group was part of Flatbush and Tillery Street. Once we stopped the bridges, we stopped Manhattan and Brooklyn, nothing moved from that direction. When some people got arrested, then we moved to the trains. Reverend Sharpton and them was on, at that time they called it the IRT, the 2 and the 3.
Yep.
Well, I was on the DM and the Q and the R at DeKalb
IND.
Avenue. Once we pulled them cords, nothing moved in this city. We shut this down. And what you just said about elected officials, organizations, groups now need to plan how to go about it. So if Jennifer, because if we become reactive, then we are going to destroy.
Right.
People are going to get hurt or killed. But if we put in place certain things that need to be done to make this, that let the city know that the decision was a wrong decision, and we shut this city down. Not only if nothing moves, we're talking about affect this city economically, put things in place that this country, we can lead by example to show that, hey, if you continue to do what you do, not only in New York, this will happen to your city, your state. That's what we're going to have to do.
You best believe that the powers that be, I'm sorry, you best believe the powers that be, they're putting their plan in place.
Yes. That's right.
A part of our plan, I think.
I would say just to add to Larry,
Bobby.
just to add to Larry's fact base, right? So the Washington Post, as you pointed out, Fatim, as of July 30th this year, 519 police shootings, shot and killed. The state with the most is Florida with 34. In terms of races, 176 were white, 124 were black, 104 were Hispanic, and the majority of them are male. 490 men, 28 female, and 1 unknown.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I
A statistic that often isn't put out that's talked about, there are, and I am not saying that blacks are not mistreated by the police. They are very much so. But the statistic that often isn't put out is the shooting and killings of white people, which is significant as well.
That's right.
All
Bob,
pe-
I think it was trying to. You was trying to say something, Bob?
Yeah, I was just trying to suggest that another alternative to letting our feelings be expressed is for each and every listener out there who's concerned about the Eric Garner matter to write a letter to the commissioner before he has to make a decision, and let him know how you're feeling and what you would like him to do. He needs to hear the voices of our citizens on this issue. The problem that exists earlier was that our voices were almost silent, and which resulted in the negative result overall. But I think programs like this, like OpenLine, we need to
Gotta have the
continue.
conversation.
We need to continue to assault this and continue to express our outrage and our hope that the commissioner does the right thing.
But
I just want to give a shout out to Tamika Mallory.
Yes. Yes.
During the
Sarsour,
debate.
Kirsten
Foy.
and there was another brother
My
The
brother,
rapper,
Masoon,
my
my
My son.
who
rapper.
were at the Democratic debate. I was watching the debate. I heard you and I saw you.
That's right.
And I commend you
Yes.
for your act of courage at the debate.
let me,
Exactly.
I wanna,
Because
I
de
wanna,
Blasio, instead of tackling this, is too busy running for president.
if I could, I wanna just-
because we got about 15 minutes.
right, just to add point to Bob's point, and hopefully I didn't lose my train of thought, my God. The reality is this: at the end of the day, when it comes down, you're right. Programs like this have to talk the conversation up.
Right.
You've got to start bringing in people and what have you that have this cadre of member-based situations. Falls right under the guideline of what we're presenting with National Action Network with the One Family, One Community initiative.
Right.
Getting the real leadership to the table, who have the access, who have the followers, who have the folks on Instagram and Facebook, and start messaging the right stuff so that we can stay intact of what's happening. But understand something: this commissioner has to actually balance himself between not only community, but his cops. And the question of the matter is he going to go out knowing that the cops lost faith in him? And is he going to do right by them in order to save face? Or is he just going to say to this mayor, this is your political football, you got to handle it yourself, this is where I'm going?
Are
Yeah,
you
and the
saying the
police-
cops are holding us hostage?
I never said that. I never said that.
What are you saying?
I never said that. I don't know where you got that.
What
Yeah, that's what I said. I never said that. What's your question?
Because I'm concerned here. We can't get justice because the police position prevails over that of the community.
That's not what I said.
I'm not saying no,
What-
no, brother.
what-
I don't want you to
That's
be
not what I said. But
I'm
I'll
not
give you some clarity.
I'm not saying you're saying that, but I'm saying that the way this because I heard it on the radio this morning, I'm hearing it now. The way this conversation keeps going, it's just like de Blasio when he was in debate. I can't say anything because it's in litigation.
Right.
Or I can't say anything because it's going to upset the unions. Or I can't say anything because our police, the other day, the head of the PBA in New York threatened. He said, the police will not have faith anymore in the system. Whose city is it? Is it the police city or is it our city? It's just like in Newark. We're trying to have a police review board. 60 years we've been demanding a police review board. As soon as we get the police review board, what happens? The FOP goes into court, files an injunction, and stops the function of the police review board. That is the subversion of democracy.
So to my point, and what have you, I understand the frustration. But what I'm saying to you is our reality. Right. And our reality today is that these politicians have no backbone. So what they're going to do is they're going to kowtow to whatever's most important to them, which is to try to survive. So they're going to allow for this police commissioner to say and do what he feels is necessary for him to do to save face amongst his rank and file.
So I have faith in James O'Neill, right? And he has been, out of most of the police commissioners that we've had in New York City, he has probably been the most outspoken against Patrick Lynch, the head of the police union out there, who, in my opinion,
but he got to be outspoken against de Blasio.
I get, but that's his boss. But de Blasio's his boss. So I do believe he will come back and say he's fired, right? But de Blasio, the problem I've had with de Blasio during this whole thing is he's waited for somebody else to do something. He's waited, and he's tried to blame in the debate. He tried to blame the Obama, the Justice, right? They're saying that, well, they took their time, and now 5 years later, they didn't put forth any charges out there, and so now we can do what we wanted to do. But no, let's be clear. You could have done that. The Fed said, "Give us a shot." You could have said, "No, you get your shot." The same, you can do it parallel, but I'm going to take action on this this officer to send a message to all the officers and the citizens in New York City that this is what we stand for. And if I lose in court, so be it. At least I showed that I was willing to take a fight. And what he's doing, what he did is he's now blaming other people, saying, and now he's waiting for the commissioner to do it.
Right. So
And I believe the commissioner is going to say, listen, he got to go. He does not represent the type of police that I want to oversee in this city. Correct. So I do have faith in James O'Neill, but we will see.
We will see.
What you're saying,
in James O'Neill, he was wasn't he a media person? And so, I just can't help but think that maybe in this particular time we've got somebody who will know how to come down the right way and figure out how to
I hope
message.
so.
I don't know.
So I just want to
what
get.
you're saying-
I want to
It's been
get
5 years. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's
What
been
you're
5 years. I want to get
Team,
into the
before,
debates.
before you do, let me just add this. Also, our listening audience, if you want to write a letter to the commissioner, go ahead and write that letter. All right, and he needs to hear your voices as well, and pass it on to your
Absolutely.
friends. And write a letter.
Calling,
That will help.
tweeting,
That
emailing,
will help.
the whole
Brother
thing.
Fatim.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
because it goes to your point
Brother
that
Fatim.
it's about who the politicians feel that they're beholden to,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So if you look even with the police union, who did they support during the election? They supported Donald Trump, right? So you have to look at how this is all interconnected and why you need to make yourselves, whether it's economically or any other way, why you need to make yourselves, your communities, and what you want to happen, why you need to make these politicians beholden to your interests. And this is what people need to start organizing and doing as well too. And I just want to add to something you said earlier. Yeah, thank you, Lou. Thank you, Fatine. But an important point about what Larry said earlier, which I agree 1,000% about the national. So there's lots of great independent reporting about the numbers of people who've been killed, but there's no national database. And the same thing goes for instance, with hate crimes, right? The FBI, even according to their own stats, they've said the hate crimes have gone up every single year. Actually, they went up once Donald Trump got into office. They exponentially increased, and they've gone up every single year. Now, the FBI stats are also lowballed because jurisdictions are not required to report them. They voluntarily give give information. So if you do not have this requirement, you don't have an accurate accounting of how often this stuff happens. So again, to connect both stories together, we need national moves on this stuff. Not only local, national.
I agree with you. Now, I want to get into. We had 2 nights of debates of the Democratic candidates, and one of the things last week, Larry thought I was picking at him, but I was bringing up a point, and you answered it. You answered it, because I said at the point, I said, where's Senator Bernie Sanders, And well, he answered that, in the first night. And so we had 2 nights, and it always seems like the second night, gets that more attention because it's the last debate. But let's start. I'm gonna start with the panel, and throw out the first night debate. What did you think? Who did you think did well? And then we'll move on to the second night. And since I threw that out to you, I'll start with you, Larry. First night of debate.
Well, I thought it was a strong night for Senator Sanders. It was also a strong night for Elizabeth Warren. I think a lot of the outcome had to do with the way CNN set it up. They set it up as a, Worldwide Wrestling Federation match of the so-called left of the party against all of these other moderates. And, it's just so... It's so crazy. I'm not going to say it's unfortunate. It is what it is. You got 20 candidates, 20 in the debate, 10 and 10. It is what it is. You can't really have a real discussion like that. But I thought Senator Sanders had a strong night. His signature line for the night was, "I wrote the damn bill." And Elizabeth Warren, I think her signature line for the night was, "We shouldn't use Republican talking points." We're the Democratic Party. What did she say? Let's not talk about what we can't do. Let's talk about what we can do. So I thought they had a strong night.
I didn't watch it, the first one. I watched the second one.
I agree, and I also think Castro did really well. Booker reasserted himself.
You're on the second night.
The second night.
Yeah.
The first night.
Okay, well, both. I think Warren did. I thought we were talking about both. Sorry. Warren did really well. Sanders did well. And I agree, Larry. I also felt that the moderators used a lot of right-wing talking points on both nights. So, for instance, instead of asking questions like, what do you think about the Trump administration, locking up children in detention facilities and how can we stop this crisis, they asked questions like, oh, what do we do? What was the question about illegals coming in or open borders, basically open borders talking points. So they perpetuated a lot of the right wing's talking points, and that shaped the narrative of the conversation. And you saw people pushing back. You saw people like Castro and others saying, we shouldn't be repeating stuff that they say. And that was where I had a big issue with who was moderating and how those questions were posed.
So I'm just going to jump in, and since we're putting it.
I want to just say real quick, what is the deal with how they are treating Marianne Williamson? Every time she seems to get out there and start to talk, they cut her off. She brings up the Flint water crisis. She brings up a payment, reparations to African Americans, and they seem to every time she goes out there,
they're treating her like she's some flower child.
Exactly,
Right.
So I'm watching that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to continue with the first night because now
we don't have much time, right? So maybe we'll just bring the two together.
We expanded for a couple of more minutes.
So what I thought was interesting. I think Elizabeth Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Sanders won one candidate, right? That they held their own, but I don't think there was any real movement per se. The second night, what I thought was fascinating and disturbing at the same time was I thought that the candidates looked desperate in trying to go after and take down Joe Biden. Like I thought it was a pathetic showing.
De Blasio.
De Blasio. I thought all of them. Even Kamala Harris. I'm just gonna be honest. I thought. Kamala Harris, and we've talked about this a little bit. Be careful if you're gonna open up a box and start. Be careful if you're gonna start swinging.
She got whooped a little.
She got beat down.
But I said that should
got
happen.
beat down.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was across the board. they rather than talking about the issues, they were trying to come at him, almost as though they thought, well, Kamala got, she got off some hits in the first debate, so maybe if we tried this same tactic, and it wasn't effective, and in so doing, they also they were actually going against their base,
Yeah,
right? When taking him
exactly.
down on some Obama initiatives and calling out Obama's record, that's the base.
But that was dangerous because Obama celebrates a 95%
Yes.
favorability rate in the Democratic Party. So here it is, you're going after Biden on stuff that he was supporting Obama on. You put yourself in a bad position right there.
Right, or the fact that they went after Obama more than Donald Trump himself.
Right.
Yes.
Which I cannot understand that this is the number one threat to everything. Your entire base, your entire party wants him out of office. He should have been focus number
Why
one.
do you think?
But
so no,
because
why do you think
Biden-
but why do you think they went after Obama?
They went after Obama because Biden is the front
he's
runner.
the VP.
And so if they're going to attack him, right? And so people say, well, don't attack him for, what he did in the past, right? So don't attack him for for 1990, was it 1995? The three strikes,
94, I think.
3 strikes and you're out, right? Or say in Kamala Harris's case, you better be very careful in attacking him on his criminal justice record,
Exactly.
given your criminal justice record.
Which is worse.
So they try to come with the more current things.
But do you think they went after? My question is, do you think they went after Obama in a sense, as you just said, to go after Biden, but basically to push Biden out to say, are you gonna hide behind Obama's record? Or
Well,
what
Corey
is
tried
your
to say that.
record?
Corey
What
tried
are
to say
you
that.
going to do? You're the front runner now. What are you going to do? Are you just a front runner because you were 8 years with Obama, or you're the front runner because you're standing out there on your own policy?
Right, but what happened, if you listen carefully, and this is not in defense of Biden, so I don't want anybody to suggest that I'm sitting here talking in defense of Biden. But, there were a couple of things where he said, no, I do it differently than Obama did, right? Or this was not perfect, and I'm going to build on it, right?
That's what he said.
So, I think he did present what he would do or what he would do differently. The mistake that they made was that they were so hungry to try to knock him off the top box that in so doing they were punching at Obama, and the Democrats who are going to come out in strong numbers like they did in 2008 and 2012 are not going to come out for you if you knock Obama.
I brought that up to Reverend Sharpton. I asked him because I was a little curious about that. And I said, well, Reverend Sharpton, I said, let's be real. I said, they have to go out here and distinguish themselves. So, if yes, they can go after Trump, but let's be real. They need to go after each other first. Reverend Sharpton said to me, and I thanked him for this. He said, Fatim, you're right. They do have to go after each other. But they have to be very careful.
Yes.
Because if they go, and they got to remember, what they say about one another,
Comes
the
back.
Republicans will use that and put that in a commercial and use that against them and go against that front runner.
And we learned it from Clinton and Sanders, right? And I'm not at all, again, I'm not opining one way or the other about whether or not Sanders did what he should have done or not. But after those primaries, right, Sanders called out so many issues. Hillary Clinton, and she contributed to a lot of her problems, right? But she was a wounded warrior out there, and a lot of the people who would have come out for Sanders decided to stay home.
Let's not also forget the fact that de Blasio was trying to get traction.
Yes.
He wanted to try to pick a
needed
fight
to
to make it
traction,
seem like it
yes.
was between him and Biden so he can shift the camera time to his favor. So he actually hurt himself more than he helped himself because he was looking like a bully, but at the same time, Biden just looked at him and said, I'm not taking that bait.
What about
Gillibrand?
Cory-
What about
Cory-
Gillibrand,
what
though,
about-
right? Gillibrand did the same.
What about Cory Booker? Now,
Cor-
what about Cory Booker? Because I'm just going to go out here. I had some issues with Cory Booker when he was mayor. I had a problem with the police guy. I
Biden
remember he
brought it
came
up.
in here.
You did.
but I will give Cory Booker. He made some traction.
But where's his percentiles at now?
Huh?
Where's his percentages at?
Well, he went up
Nothing.
about 3 points. I heard.
He's
Or
still
about
really
three.
he's still in the single digits.
He's single digits, but I thought he did
Well,
did pretty good.
what I heard a commentator say, which I thought was fascinating, he said, you know, they came out there and they threw their you know, their jabs, right, their punches, in the hopes of moving a half percentage point, and did it do more harm to the Democratic
might have-
Party
Right.
overall?
It
And
just
then-
helps with the opposition
yeah.
research
Exactly.
with the Republicans. That's all.
And we have to see, because like I said, you know, when Donald Trump ran and how he ran and he bullied those folks, again, is there a certain rule of how you supposed to perform out here? In the past, this is how the candidates perform.
I'm a little concerned because it's too quiet over here.
Yeah, I noticed that. I'm trying to get to the talk.
I know. You know, and-
I
go
was
ahead.
trying to get some space.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I know Fatim's going to jump on me about this. I reject the whole paradigm of the media creating and fomenting the discord within this particular campaign in the primary.
Nah, this job.
Let me.
I just joking. Go ahead, brother. I just joking. Go ahead, brother.
I reject the whole paradigm.
Yes.
The media is rigging our democracy right now.
I want to agree with that.
It's rigging our democracy. There's false race and the internecine problems and differences among the Democrats. It's clear that they want to isolate Bernie Sanders because he's the most authentically progressive person in the race. Everybody are trying to be is robbing this from him, robbing that from him, whether it's Medicare for all or universal health care for all or whatever he has proposed. Now you see Warren, who, while she says, I'm a diehard capitalist, she says, but I believe in universal health care.
She never said diehard capitalist.
No,
she
she
just
said, I'm a
she
capitalist.
said I'm a capitalist with I want reform.
A distinction
big
without
difference.
And Bernie doesn't sell me, so-
May I finish? A distinction without a difference, as far as I'm concerned.
I disagree.
Fine.
Totally disagree.
You got it.
All right, never. The media is manipulating the entire process of our democratic process, which I reject totally. And I just think it's going to get to the point where, as you said, the Republicans are going to use every difference that they've manifest on these debate stages in very slick produced campaign ads, and it's going to hurt us. It's going to hurt us very badly. And the people who are really saying some interesting things, I think Yang is saying some very, very interesting things.
We had a good night.
I agree totally. And his heart is in the right place, and his politics are defended by stats and data around the economy. No one has talked about how we can share the wealth in this country by first dealing with the military-industrial complex. There's no reason why we shovel billions and trillions of dollars to our military-industrial complex. I think Williamson, as people have said, I think her position around our spiritual emptiness is a very important character and question that we really need to be looking at. But they're not going to get any traction because they're not being supported by the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party and the media. The media is complicit in this. Why? Because they're making billions and billions of dollars in ad revenues by keeping this wheel of controversy among they should stop fighting and nitpicking about parsing different policies. Trump is the main danger.
If I can just say one
Trump
quick
is
thing
the main
on
danger.
a lot of people didn't really lean in and look at what Biden did. But I will tell you that I think that what he was very effective in doing Wednesday night was, one, cementing his base with Obama supporters. And and particularly African Americans, by defending strongly Obama on many of his positions, beginning with Affordable Care Act and saying, it was beginning and now we can build on it but not get rid of it.
Correct.
I think he did probably a very effective job of beginning to appeal or appealing to or continuing to appeal to the independents and the moderates, not the progressives, but the moderates, by talking about immigration and saying, no, not everybody gets to come through this door and, not be held accountable if they did not get in line, and not come in here, for asylum. I think he probably scored some really big points there. I'm not saying one way or the other whether or not I agree with it, but I'm just saying I think that what he did on that stage was he figured out how to cement his base, and he figured out how to begin to appeal to that centrist, to that moderate, to that independent, and even those who are maybe voted for Trump last go round, who don't like what's happening with immigration but don't want to be so progressive, who don't want to see Medicare for all to the cost of, quote, $3 trillion. I think he did a good job of saying, I will hold the line and be accountable, but I'll keep coming along with Obama.
So a couple of viewers out there. DB4IP, Tulsi Gabbard was Biden's secret assassin. In other interviews I've seen of her, she tends to support the man, must be looking to a potential job from him. Hopefully she makes the next debate. Anthony Long, Mr. de Blasio needs to go out gracefully now. And Saw One, again, Tulsi Gabbard has spoken about the MIC and the money funneled into these endless wars, but y'all ain't hearing her or even mentioning her.
Right. Now let's talk about, I wanted to say two things. Well, let me just say this first, because I know when I say the next one is going to go. The next debate, which is going to take place at Texas Southern University in Houston, September 12th and 13th. And I don't know if it's going to be 2 nights. Well, it may be 2 nights still, but right now there's only 8 candidates. There's only 8 candidates that have qualified for the I guess in the sense of the requirements out there. You have to have 2% support in 4 of the polls and contributions from at least 130,000 individual donors. The 8 candidates who have qualified so far is former Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Cory Booker, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senator Kamala Harris, former Representative Beto O'Rourke, Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Senator Amy, how do you say her last name? Klobuchar.
And I thought Beto O'Rourke suspended his
campaign.
I think probably just because of the
When?
incident.
Oh, maybe because
Right.
Okay.
But they're there. But I want to go back to
Buttigieg
Yeah.
did.
Okay.
right. I want to go.
Yeah. Right.
I want to go back to Representative Tulsi Gabbard, where she went at
Kamala Harris.
and rightfully so. We knew that was coming. We knew that was
Yeah.
coming, but we didn't expect it coming from her. I thought that it was going to be Joe Biden. But she stayed
to the comments,
she stayed the
she was the
course, and
assassin.
she made Kamala sweat.
Well, I'm surprised Kamala didn't have a better answer for this because
Yes,
she
she
knew
didn't
this was
have
going to
one.
come.
She
This
doesn't
has
have
been the
an answer.
number one criticism.
She didn't know it was coming. And the reason why I don't think she knew it was coming is because if you think about it, she has been in the limelight as a senator during congressional hearings where she gets to fire and be the prosecutor, and people are like wowed by her as with her prosecutorial stance. Then she went into the first debate and she fired at Biden, and he wasn't ready. So I think she got a little bit
If she didn't,
comfortable.
if
Yeah,
she
but-
didn't
but
know,
the
if
thing-
she didn't know it was coming, she should fire her whole
whole team,
campaign
exactly.
staff.
She should,
'Cause-
fire,
yeah.
she should know that herself.
Yeah, exactly.
should fire
Because
her
it's been the
whole
number one
campaign
criticism
staff.
from progressives,
It's been
But
all.
she's been getting over.
But
or
it's
getting by.
it's been all out there in the news. There are you don't have to be a research specialist. You could go on your phone and Google Kamala Harris
Right.
records, and you'll have everything that you need, to do what Tulsi Gabbard did the other night. My concern is that I don't know if Joe Biden is going to make it to the convention. It's a classic catch-22. These other people are running for president.
Right.
They're not up there to be what is it called? Scenery. They're not up there. They're competing with him, and they're going at him, and they're going to go at each other. It's a catch-22. I mean, Biden.
I don't know if they're really getting punches.
I think he did better, Jennifer,
I think they missed it
but
on
I
this
don't
one.
think he did I still don't
I
think
didn't
he
say
was
he
that
did a great-
strong.
I didn't say he did a
Right.
great job.
I
I
don't
don't
think
think
he
I
was
don't
still
know if their
strong.
punches
He's
landed.
still to me is still not strong enough.
Electability is what it's gonna come
Yeah,
down
I
'cause
think-
right now I know that during this time, from what I heard, the numbers were for. At the time, Senator Obama was about 3% at that particular time. But right now, Bernie,
Electability will only go so far.
Right.
It's going to be at a
Exactly.
certain point. It's going
I
to
was
be a
just gonna say
question
that,
of
yeah.
competence
Exactly.
and even ability.
And Biden
I mean, he
is
made a
still not
comment to Cory
strong
Booker
yet.
where he said, "The future president." Did you hear that?
Yeah,
Did
I
you hear
saw
that?
that.
I mean, his
Yeah.
mental.
I think-
No, I think-
No,
he's in.
I'm not saying that.
I'm
no.
questioning
He's in his.
I'm not saying that.
He's
No.
he's in his 70s. He may be. God forbid. He may be going through issues. Let me just finish it out. We don't know if he's going. If there are early signs of
For the record,
dementia.
I'm not going.
We don't
Me
know.
either.
No,
I'm not going there, but
we
he's
don't
still
know
not
that.
strong.
But
He's not
the
one of
bottom line
strongest
is what we
candidates
really
there.
need to do is question both Kamala Harris and Cory Booker's position on the BDSM movement and their positions on Israel, because I think both of them are Trojan horses, and I think both of
I
them
can't
are
wait.
very dangerous.
I can't wait until Warren and Sanders are on the stage.
And we need to question them.
when they're on the stage with Booker and Kamala and all of them. But I'm with you. I'm not questioning Biden's mental
I'm not
anything.
gonna
I'm
do
not
that
saying that.
neither, but one of
But
the
wait,
things-
let me finish. But I think it's what Jennifer was saying. I think it's more that he is placating to what he thinks is he represents the establishment, right? So he's placating to that middle of the road. What the Democratic establishment thinks that is going to win them the election is they're going to try to win back the moderates and the people who may have voted for Trump and bring them back. And that, what I personally think is the problem, because you need somebody that is going to energize and rile up your base, and your base is much more progressive than that. And that is the problem, once again, with the establishment and the actual base of the party, in my view.
Yeah. Well,
I think
We'll
I
see.
think Senator Harris and Senator Booker are both very dangerous Trojan horses.
I just want to see these moderators do a much better job.
Oh, they're
Questioning
complicit. They can't do
I thought CNN would
is
do a
their
better job.
But that's the
No.
problem.
That's what
Is
you-
their job. That it's not that they have to do a better job. Their job
It
is
looked
to
like-
obfuscate, to deflect, to divert, and not get at the real issues, because the media, the corporatist media, has an agenda itself.
Right. For instance, they didn't ask about gun control. People said, "Why didn't they talk about gun control?" Well, no one asked a question about gun control.
They didn't talk about domestic terrorism.
They didn't talk
Nobody
about a lot
yeah,
of stuff.
'cause it was like-
White
Foreign policy
supremacy.
was like one question, if that.
And every time,
Rise of
and every time,
Trumpism,
every
rise
time
of
they
white
tried
supremacy.
every time a candidate tried to position it that way, they would get cut off in spite of
and put
moderators.
back
So,
and forth.
yeah.
Also, at the beginning of the week, we saw Bob Pickett, your president, your guy, lashed out. First he did at Congressman Elijah Cummings. And then he went at Reverend Al Sharpton. And I saw, Elijah Cummings, he was kind of quiet for the week. He commented yesterday. And again, the comments are just, again, I just don't think it was a strong comeback for me. from
Listen,
Elijah Cummings.
but like we talked about last week, right, with Cummings, right? So there's a reason why 45 has intensified his attacks on Cummings.
Right.
Because Cummings is close
Oh, yeah.
to getting the subpoenas and the
That's right,
information,
yes.
not only on 45, but his daughter and his son-in-law. So his pattern has been attack those who are getting too close. So
waiting
to
for
me,
you.
Cummings is like,
Lose
let
your
me
hand next time.
continue to take the high
Boom,
ground, right?
steal.
I'm not going to get sucked into this fight. And what was interesting is 45 sent another inappropriate tweet when it was revealed that Cummings, someone had broke into his house.
Yes.
And instead of showing empathy, which he can't spell, he doesn't know what it looks like, he couldn't smell it, he couldn't trip over it, he had an inappropriate quote and says, "Oh, too bad," where Nikki Haley who she was his UN head of the UN
Right.
for him. She came out and she said that was uncalled for. And then what happens? Kellyanne Conway claps back at Nikki Haley, telling her, "Get back in your place," because the speculation is that when he runs, he's not going to have Pence run with him. He would try to appeal to women because he knows he's losing women
Right.
votes to get Nikki Haley to be his running mate.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
said that when she
she's
resigned,
popular.
that she was going to run. Remember when
Exactly.
she resigned? I was like,
we
she's
were
going to be
talking
the
about
VP.
that. We
Yep.
did just talk
Yeah.
about that. But Reverend Sharpton clapped back at.
It's a soap opera, isn't it? It is.
He clapped back at the president, and he had a
Oh
couple.
yeah, he had a great
couple of good-
line. He had a great line where what did he say? He was like, if I was a con man, he would have nominated.
He said,
He would have
"Trump says
nominated
I'm
me to be in your
I'm a
cabinet.
troublemaker and a con man. I do make he said, I do make trouble for bigots. If he really thought I was a con man, he would want me in his cabinet." And
yeah.
that's Reverend
That was the line of the week.
Sharpton's quote. Job report came out Friday, and my question is, who gets the credit now? Who really gets the credit? Does Trump now start to get the credit for this job report? The job report came out. It added 164,000 jobs in the month of July. Unemployment basically was unchanged. Black unemployment is 6%. White unemployment is 3.3%. The only double digit in unemployment that has been reported is teenagers, 12.8%. Who gets the credit now?
So
for this?
again, this whole thing, right? Which is it started under the Obama administration.
Correct.
More jobs, percentage-wise, in that time period were created by Obama. What Trump administration has done is they have maintained. They haven't grown it, right? And if you would go back to even the GDP conversations, under Trump administration, they broke 3% one time. It was broken multiple times GDP under Obama, and actually the most recent GDP is now it's 2.1.
Correct.
So it's going the opposite direction. So he's going to take credit for it like every other politician because these things have a lag. What was put in place in one administration, you see the fruits of it coming through the others. And despite all his stupid decisions and his trade thing, which by the way, that's what caused the Fed to actually lower the rate, which is there's still so much uncertainty about the trade tariffs and the damage it's going to cause. And you're starting to see it now with truckers. So truckers had high employment opportunities at the end of the Obama administration and the beginning of the Trump administration. And now they don't see as much of it. Why? Because there are less goods coming in and out of the country because of these tariffs. So and you got other companies that their supply chains are starting to dry up because they don't want to pay the extra cost. So now they have to go find more supply chains, which is going to impact cargo movement. And so he has done things that I believe what he did in the beginning of his administration, if he doesn't make it to a second term, or if he does make it to a second term, you're going to see the ills of his dumbass decisions that he put in his first term.
Excellent
Yeah,
point.
and that's the part that I worry about that I said last week too, that all of this stuff, right? So this horrific act of domestic terrorism in El Paso, the chance, a mob mentality of people saying, go back, send her back, and the president saying, go back to where you came from. All of that is happening in the context of when things are quote unquote relatively good, where the unemployment rate is low, where the economy is doing relatively well, and there hasn't been, thankfully, a terrorist attack anywhere. What is going to happen if we do have another recession, or things are bad, or God forbid there's a terrorist attack? What are people going to be incited to do? That's what really scares me and worries me.
My concern is, first of all, who is the economy doing well for? It's doing well for the 1%. It's not doing well for the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And the reason unemployment is so low is because a whole lot of people are gigging. They don't have real jobs. I mean, they have real, do you understand what I'm saying? They don't have, you work for Walmart, but you're not classified as an employee. You're classified as an associate, so Walmart can get out paying benefits. And so you can go to the federal government to get food stamps to supplement the inadequate salary that you have.
Or you're working 2 and 3
Or
low-wage jobs.
that you're working 2 and 3 low-wage jobs. So the economy is doing well for the people at the top, but the rest of us are suffering. But the other concern that I have is Brexit and the election of Boris Johnson now as Prime Minister of Great Britain. My fear is that if Johnson goes forward with his plan for a no-deal Brexit, that it is going to have catastrophic effect, one, on the British economy, two, it's going to reverberate through Europe, and three, it's going to come back and hit the United States.
The world.
And hit the
It'll
world. And you've even seen, if like you read magazines like The Economist, you see Boris Johnson on that roller coaster and is getting ready to go downhill. Why do you think it was so hard for Theresa May to break with the European Union? Because there are tremendous forces countervailing against that break. Why are they countervailing? Because their interests are at stake, and because their profits will fall, and because banks will fail. And remember, just because a bank fails in Tokyo, don't think we're not going to feel it here. Or a bank fails in London, we're not going to feel it
It
here.
said the New York Times today that if he goes along with this, that this is going to be horrific. Yeah, that's in today's New York Times. You know. Well, we're going to get ready to wrap it up. I always throw it to our sports gentlemen, and we have Bobby Childs. I listed two stories. You may have one that you may want to add.
So you can go with your two. There's one I want to talk about, the Hall of Fame,
Okay,
and it
so-
comes back to a comment Nilla had said earlier on. But go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, last week, the Major League Baseball was trying to make show up their teams, the teams that are doing well, trying to get some better players to plug in to make their push for the playoffs.
Yeah, the trade deadline.
Exactly.
The trade deadline.
And then you got other teams who were not doing so well if they were going to sell off and try to make their team stronger for next year in the future. So the Mets did something that was very interesting. You know, it was talked about the New York Yankees getting from the Toronto Blue Jays Marcus Stroman. Marcus Stroman was a big phenomenon. He's from Long Island. And he's a good pitcher. Well, the Mets pulled that off and got him. He pitched last night. He didn't get the win, but the Mets did win the game. The second thing that I listed is that 40 years to the date of August 2nd, 1979, I remember where I was when I got the news that New York Yankees catcher Thurman Munson was killed in that plane crash. I was playing a game called Stratomatic, Bobby, baseball board game. And my mother called me down, and I thought something happened to my father, you know, because it was around the time he comes home, around 5:35. And she brought me in, and she said, you know, being a fan of the Yankees, that Thurman Munson was killed in a plane crash. Well, he was flying his own plane, and there was a day off, and he had flew back home, and he was practicing, taking lessons about, you know, taking off and landing, and something went wrong. And come to find out, when he crashed, he didn't have his seatbelt on. He broke his neck. So he was basically going to be paralyzed if he survived that crash. But through the smoke, you know, that's how he died. There was two other people in the plane, and they got out, and they survived that plane crash. So it's just 40 years ago, and I just wanted just to mention that. I know Bob Slade be sitting in this seat here. That's something that I definitely know that we've talked about, and it's something that I know that he would definitely mention. Bobby?
Yeah.
I
So
played in the Thurman Munson Baseball League.
So yesterday, the NFL had their Hall of Fame inductions, and one of the players who was inducted into the Hall of Fame was Champ Bailey. He had played with the Washington team as well as finished his career with Denver. So they always give speeches about who inspired them, who they want to thank. Some of it is pretty moving, some of it is very long. But what struck me about Champ Bailey's yesterday, he talked about how he says he implores all his white friends to listen to the plight of black men. And he said, when we tell you we're afraid, believe us. When we tell you we're worried about things, believe us. And he said, because we're so big and athletic, when we're not on the field, we worry for our lives. And that's the way he closed his speech last night. And so, near the one you said earlier about black men being fearful, with all the shootings that are going out there, it just struck me that he ended his speech last night about that.
Exactly. That was touching. I just want to say this here as we get ready to close out. 2 events. One is taking place today. WBLS Quiet Storm host Lenny Green annual Family Day is taking place today at Von King Park in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. This is a free event, so bring the whole family out for live music, food, and plenty of fun. And we're going to try. I know Bobby Childs is retired from softball, but there will be a softball game this afternoon.
Yeah,
out
tell me how
there.
that went, because I won't be there.
Yeah, I know. Meet DJ Bentrock of Classic Flavors, and I will also be there playing, not coaching, but playing in the game.
Uh-oh.
And also, Circle of Sisters 2019 is coming Saturday, September 7th, and just added to head up the WBLS performance stage is the one and only Brian McKnight. For the latest Circle of Sisters updates and tickets, please go to circleofsisters.com. Again, that's circleofsisters.com. And while you're there, check out the Circle of Sisters merchandise. This is exclusive Circle of Sisters merchandise while it lasts. Circle of Sisters 2019 with 107.5 WBLS. And thank you, Bobby, because sometimes I get a little loose there. Eric Gardner.
There we go. Thank
There
you.
you go, baby.
We
So,
just deliver the facts.
There
Jeff.
you go. So I'll turn it over to Bobby to close it out.
So in the immortal words of the great Bob Slade, get your mind right and keep a good thought.
Have a good Sunday.
And God bless all of you.